The wailing siren of the ambulance cut through the heavy Manhattan rain, but it was nothing compared to the screaming in my own head. The heart monitor shrieked a flat, piercing warning before the first drop of my blood even hit the sterile tile of the emergency room. "Get the chief of surgery now." A nurse's voice cracked through the chaotic din of the St. Jude Medical Center high and terrified. The sound cut through the weeping of other patients and the mechanical hum of life support machines. On the gurney, I was thrashing. I couldn't stop. The pain was a living, breathing entity tearing me apart from the inside out. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be alive. I am Julian Hayes, the clinically barren, discarded trash of the Hayes family. Yet I gasped for air, the oxygen rattling in my fluid-filled lungs, my vision blurring into a dizzying haze of harsh, fluorescent lights and terrifying shadows. I clutched my distended abdomen, my knuckles white as bone, a protective gesture hardwired into my very soul. The agony ripped through my lower body like a serrated blade. I was an anomaly, a medical impossibility, a ghost who had dared to create life, where the world said there were only barren ruins. For 9 agonizing months, I had hidden in cheap Queens motels, scrubbing toilets and eating scraps just to survive. I had run from the shadows of my own bloodline, from a family that would gladly carve these babies out of me to use as corporate pawns. And now, as darkness encroached on the edges of my vision, the terrifying realization anchored me to the waking world. My body had failed me, and I had been dragged into the very epicenter of elite power in New York. Suddenly, the double doors at the end of the hall burst open, slamming against the walls with a violence that instantly silenced the entire corridor. The temperature in the trauma bay seemed to plummet. He strode in. He was a dark tempest wrapped in a pristine white coat. I didn't need to see his face clearly to know what he was. The sheer suffocating weight of his alpha aura sucked the oxygen straight out of my lungs. It was a potent, dominant presence that usually commanded immediate submission from anyone in the room. But tonight the air around him was cold, sterilized by a professional detachment that was somehow more terrifying than pure rage. Status Dr. Elias Stone barked, not breaking stride, as he snapped on latex gloves. The sharp snap echoed like a gunshot in the tense room. Male Omega, unidentified, unresponsive to questions, the head trauma nurse stammered, running alongside my gurney as they wheeled me into the surgical theater. Severe hemorrhaging. Blood pressure is dropping rapidly. 60/40. Doctor, he's in active labor. Elias stopped. For a fraction of a second, his mask of icy indifference cracked. Labor. He looked down at me. Really looked at me. I knew I looked pathetic. I was emaciated, my collarbones jutting out like fragile wings, my silver hair matted with cold sweat and the grime of the city streets. I looked nothing like the pampered, soft Omegas that usually frequented the St. Jude 4 VIP maternity ward. I was a creature of the gutters, broken and discarded, but the belly that swollen, impossible mound was undeniable. Prepare one emergency C-section. Elias ordered, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into a command tone that brooked absolutely no argument. Move. But Dr. Resident interjected, breathless, holding up a glowing tablet. His biometric scan. This is Julian Hayes. The Hayes family cast him out years ago. His records show total reproductive failure. He is clinically infertile. Sir, this shouldn't be medically possible. I saw Elias's eyes narrow. The name scratched at the back of his mind. I could see the calculation in his sharp, ruthless features. The impossibility of his condition is irrelevant. Elias snarled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. If he bleeds out on my floor, I will personally strip every single one of you of your medical licenses. I don't care if it's a miracle or a curse. Get him under, now. They ripped my clothes away. And in that moment, the cheap scent blockers I had relied on for months finally washed away with the blood and sweat. The scent of night-blooming jasmine and heavy rain flooded the sterile room. Pure concentrated omega pheromones. My scent. I watched Elias freeze. His scalpel hovered in midair. Through the haze of my agony, I saw his nostrils flare. His inner alpha violently awakened a low, possessive growl vibrating in the back of his throat that he had to physically grit his teeth to suppress. He knew this scent. A memory crashed into my fading consciousness. 9 months ago. The blackout at the Plaza Hotel. The elevator trapped between floors. The pitch-black darkness, the suffocating heat, the desperation of my chemically induced heat, and the overwhelming, terrifying scent of storm and sandalwood. I had run away before the power returned, terrified of what I had done, terrified of the monster in the dark. Now the monster was standing right over me. As the anesthesia mask was clamped over my nose and mouth, my heavy eyelids fluttered open. My vibrant violet eyes locked onto his sharp obsidian gaze. Recognition struck me like a physical blow. The mask, the cold eyes, the scent of storm, and antiseptic. I choked out the words, strangled by the plastic mask. I tried to reach out my trembling, blood-stained fingers, trying to push the alpha away to protect my womb. I was trapped. I had run for 9 months only to deliver myself straight into the hands of the very man I was hiding from. No, not you. Save your strength, Elias said. His voice was strangely gentle, a stark chilling contrast to his earlier harshness. He leaned down, placing a large, steady hand on my frail shoulder, pinning me to the operating table with effortless, undeniable strength. The golden ring around his pupils flared. "I have you, Elias," whispered the dark promise, bypassing my logic and sinking straight into my bones. "You aren't dying tonight." My eyes rolled back as the anesthesia finally dragged me down into the abyss. But the last thing I smelled wasn't the metallic tang of my own blood. It was the scent I had dreamed of and dreaded every single night. The scent of my baby's father. I woke to the smell of expensive linen eucalyptus and an unnatural, terrifying silence. Panic was my first sensation, a cold, violent spike of adrenaline that made me gasp and try to throw myself upward. Pain immediately flared across my lower abdomen, a searing line of fire, reminding me of the surgeon's blade, forcing me back down into the plush, suffocating pillows. My vision swam into focus. I wasn't in the grimy, flickering fluorescence of the emergency room anymore. I was in a room that looked less like a hospital and more like a 5-star penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying panoramic view of Central Park, the green canopy contrasting sharply with the concrete jungle of Manhattan. "I wouldn't move if I were you." The voice came from the shadows near the door. I flinched, my heart hammering against my ribs. Elias Stone was sitting in a high-backed leather armchair. He had discarded the bloodied surgical gown, now dressed in a crisp charcoal dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. By all medical logic, he should have looked exhausted. Instead, he looked like a predator patiently waiting for its prey to awaken. His shattered obsidian eyes watched me with an intensity that made the air in the room feel heavy, almost unbreathable. "My babies," I croaked, my throat raw and wrecked. "Where are they?" "They are safe," Elias said, his tone perfectly neutral, devoid of any warmth. "Alive. Healthy considering the absolute squalor their mother forced them to develop in. A boy and a girl." I let out a broken sob of relief, hot tears leaking from the corners of my eyes. Thank God. I need to see them. And then I need to leave. "Please, Dr. Stone, you don't understand. If I stay here, the Hayes family will find me. They'll take them." Elias stood up slowly. The sheer physical presence of the Alpha swallowed the massive room. He walked to the edge of my bed, looming over me, placing a heavy hand on the metal railing. I shrank back instinctively. "You think you can just leave?" Elias's voice dropped dangerously low, "with my heirs." The silence that followed was louder than any screaming monitor. I stopped breathing. My pupils dilated in pure terror. "What?" "The genetic markers are undeniable," Julian Elias said softly, leaning down until I could smell the storm and sandalwood radiating from his skin. "But I didn't even need a blood test. I knew the moment I smelled you on my operating table. I knew the moment I saw the stone crescent birthmark on their tiny shoulders. I won't ask you for a dime." I pleaded, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "I'll disappear. You'll never see us again. Just don't let my family." "Enough." Elias cut me off, his eyes flashing with a terrifying golden hue. "You are not leaving this hospital. You are not leaving my sight. You are currently in the highest security suite of St. Jude. No one enters without my biometric authorization. Not the press, not the Hayes family, no one. You will stay here, you will recover, and you will provide milk for my children. Do I make myself perfectly clear?" He wasn't saving me. He was claiming his property. I swallowed the bitter taste of despair and nodded once. For the next 2 days, Elias enforced my recovery with the cold precision of a military dictator. He controlled my diet, my medication, and my schedule. I was a prisoner in a gilded cage, but what he didn't know was that a rat cornered in an alley learns how to survive. If Elias thought I was going to sit around and wait for my ruthless father or his fixers to breach this hospital and steal my children, he was dead wrong. On the third afternoon, when Elias was called away for an emergency consultation, I pressed the call button for the beta nurse assigned to me. Her name was Sarah Young and somewhat naive. "Sarah," I whispered, putting on the most pathetic, tear-streaked face I could muster. "I have a craving. A terrible, overwhelming post-pregnancy craving. If I don't get it, I think I might lose my mind." "Of course, Mr. Hayes," she said sympathetically. "What do you need? Caviar truffles?" Dr. Stone left a blank check. "Watermelons," I said, my expression dead serious. 2 of them. Small round ones, heavy, from the organic supermarket down the street. And, "Sarah, please don't tell Dr. Stone. Alphas just don't understand omega cravings. He'd think I'm crazy." An hour later, I had them. 2 perfectly round, heavy green watermelons hidden deep inside my plush mahogany wardrobe. I weighed them in my hands. About 7 pounds each. Perfect. If the Hayes family came, if Elias turned his back for even a second, I would stuff these into the silk swaddles, grab my real babies, and disappear down the fire escape. It was an unhinged paranoid plan, but trauma had long stripped away my sanity. That night, the insomnia hit me like a freight train. The luxurious room felt like a suffocating tomb. Every shadow looked like a Hayes assassin. Every distant beep of a machine sounded like Elias coming to take my twins away and throw me back into the gutter. At 2 in the morning, unable to bear the anxiety, I slowly pushed myself out of bed. My incision burned, but I ignored it, limping barefoot across the cold hardwood floor toward the adjoining private nursery. I just needed to check on them. Just one look to ensure they were still breathing. I pushed the heavy oak door open a fraction of an inch, holding my breath. The room was bathed in the soft, warm glow of a nightlight. I froze. Elias was there. The tyrant of St. Jude wishes the alpha who struck fear into the hearts of New York's medical elite was sitting in a rocking chair. He had his tailored suit jacket off his tie loosened. In his massive, powerful arms, he cradled one of my tiny babies. I watched in stunned silence as Elias Stone, a man who seemed entirely made of ice and razor blades, gently adjusted the baby's blanket. His expression was completely unguarded. The terrifying golden glint in his eyes was replaced by a soft, almost reverent awe. "Hush, little one," Elias murmured, his deep voice a soothing, velvety rumble that made my own chest vibrate. He was clumsily but carefully snapping the buttons of a fresh onesie. "Your father has you. No one is ever going to hurt you. Or your mother. I swear it." He kissed the baby's forehead. I stood in the crack of the door, trembling, my hands covering my mouth to stifle a gasp. My heart executed a painful, violent flip. The terrifying image of the alpha monster I had built up in my head for 9 months began to fracture, cracking right down the middle. We were both pretending. I was pretending to be submissive while hiding watermelons in a closet, and Elias was pretending to be a cold-blooded dictator while singing lullabies in the dark. For the first time since I ran away from the Plaza Hotel, I wondered if I had gotten the script completely wrong. The days in the St. Jude Fart IP suite bled together into a strange, suspended reality. Outside, the bulletproof glass of the penthouse Manhattan continued its relentless, chaotic spin. Inside, however, I was trapped in the eye of a hurricane, anchored solely by the terrifying gravitational pull of Elias Stone. I had expected my captivity to be an asphyxiating nightmare of submission. Instead, it became a masterclass in calculated ruthlessness, deployed entirely for my protection. One afternoon, feigning sleep, I listened to Elias standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, his voice a low, lethal murmur as he spoke into his phone. I don't care if it's the New York Times or a gossip rag. Arthur Elias snarled, his tone dripping with absolute authority. "If a single syllable about Julian or the twins goes to print, I will personally ensure your publishing house is dismantled brick by brick. And if the Hayes family's lawyers try to subpoena my hospital records again, tell them I have the biometric logs of their CEO's illicit clinic visits. Play with me, and I will burn their empire to ash." A shiver ran down my spine, but it wasn't from fear. For my entire life, the power of an alpha had only ever been used to crush me. To hear that devastating power form a fortress around me was disorienting. It was intoxicating. Our dynamic began to shift in the quiet, desperate hours of the night. Raising premature twins was a brutal, exhausting war of attrition, and surprisingly, Elias refused to leave the battlefield. The tyrant who commanded hundreds of surgeons by day was reduced to a remarkably clumsy, overly cautious giant by night. At 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, the boy whom Elias had started calling Leo let out an ear-piercing wail. The little girl, Ilara, immediately joined in creating a stereophonic cacophony of infant rage. I struggled to sit up my incision, pulling painfully, but Elias was already there. He scooped up Leo, his massive hands trembling slightly as if he were holding a live, fragile explosive. The baby only screamed louder, his tiny face turning purple. Elias looked terrified, his golden alpha eyes wide with a frantic, uncharacteristic helplessness. "You're holding him too stiffly," I murmured, my voice raspy from sleep. Elias froze, looking down at me as I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. His heart rate is elevated. He might be experiencing gastrointestinal distress. I should page the neonatal specialist. He just needs to burp Elias. I sighed, the absurdity of the situation giving me a sudden burst of courage. I walked over, ignoring the way his sharp gaze tracked my every movement. "Give him to me. Look." I gently took Leo from his massive arms. Support the neck, cup the chin, and pat the back rhythmically. Firmly, but not hard, like a heartbeat. Elias watched in stunned silence as Leo let out a small, wet burp and immediately settled against my chest, his cries dissolving into soft hiccups. The formidable Dr. Stone, a man who could perform open-heart surgery with his eyes closed, was staring at me as if I had just performed dark magic. "You have a natural instinct for them," Elias said softly, the harshness completely absent from his voice. "I had 9 months of hiding in cheap Queens motels to read every parenting book I could steal," I replied, the bitter truth slipping out before I could stop it. Elias's jaw tightened, a flash of pure, murderous rage crossing his face, not at me, but at the memories I carried. Slowly, he reached out. I braced myself, expecting a reprimand, but his long, elegant fingers simply brushed a stray lock of silver hair behind my ear. The touch was achingly tender, sending a jolt of electricity straight to my core. "You will never have to steal, hide, or run again, Julian," he whispered, his scent of storm and sandalwood wrapping around me like a heavy, warm blanket. "You are not a discarded Omega. You are the center of my world." My breath hitched. In that moment, the thick, heavy armor I had worn for years began to crack. The Hayes family had convinced me I was a broken, useless vessel. Elias looked at me like I was a king. By the end of the week, the boundary between my captivity and my own voluntary affection had blurred into nothingness. I caught myself smiling when he walked into the room. I inhaled his scent deliberately when I thought he wasn't looking. Yet the trauma of my past was a stubborn ghost. Every afternoon, while Elias was doing his rounds, I would sneak over to the mahogany wardrobe, open the heavy doors, and stare at the 2 watermelons hidden beneath my clothes. They were slowly starting to soften a ridiculous, desperate insurance policy that I was finally realizing I might not need. I'm going to tell him I decided on a rainy Friday evening. I'm going to throw the watermelons away, tell him everything about my father's threats, and actually try to build a life here. Elias had stepped out to the neonatal pharmacy down the hall to fetch a specific brand of formula, promising to be back in 2 minutes. The room was quiet, filled only with the soft patter of rain against the glass and the rhythmic breathing of the twins in their cribs. Suddenly, the heavy door hissed. It didn't beep with Elias's biometric approval. It just clicked open. I turned around with a smile, the words of my confession already on my lips. The smile died instantly. The blood in my veins turned to ice. It wasn't Elias, it wasn't Nurse Sarah. Standing in the doorway, wearing a rain-slicked trench coat and a sickeningly familiar smirk, was Cole, my father's chief fixer. The scent of stale tobacco and cheap cologne flooded the pristine room, instantly suffocating the lingering smell of sandalwood. "Hello, little bird." Cole rasped his eyes, darting hungrily toward the cribs. "Your father sends his regards. Now pack up the brats. It's time to go home." The storm had finally broken into the cage. The stench of stale tobacco and cheap cologne flooded the pristine room, instantly suffocating the lingering, comforting smell of sandalwood. My heart didn't just stop, it plummeted into my stomach. But 9 months of brutal survival instincts kicked in faster than my fear. The moment I had heard the unauthorized click of the electronic lock, before Cole had even fully stepped into the room, I had moved. The twins were already nestled safely in a padded laundry basket at the very back of the ventilated walk-in closet. What I held tightly against my chest right now, wrapped meticulously in $2,000 cashmere St. Jude swaddles, were 14 pounds of organic seedless produce. "Stay away from us," I hissed, backing away toward the floor-to-ceiling window. I forced my breathing to become shallow and erratic, letting genuine tears of panic well up in my eyes. It wasn't hard to act terrified of Cole. The man had haunted my nightmares for nearly a year. Cole chuckled a dry rasping sound that made my skin crawl. "You always were dramatic, Julian. Your father doesn't want you. He just wants the genetic gold mines you managed to incubate. Hand them over, and maybe I won't break your jaw before I leave." "No." "Please," I sobbed, clutching the watermelons tighter. My arms were actually starting to ache under the sheer weight. "Don't take my babies. They're too small. They need their mother." Cole lunged. He was fast. A ruthless beta hopped up on adrenaline and cruelty. He ripped the heavy bundles from my arms with a violent jerk. I let out a gut-wrenching scream, partly acting, and partly because the sudden shift in gravity almost pulled me down to the floor. "Heavy little brats." Cole grunted, his knees buckling slightly as he adjusted his grip on the cashmere-wrapped spheres. Before he could take another step toward the exit, the heavy, sweet door didn't just open, it practically imploded. Elias didn't step into the room, he invaded it. He had sensed the sudden violent spike in my distress pheromones from down the hall, a biological alarm bell that screamed danger. The beast Elias kept tightly leashed beneath his bespoke suits snapped its chain. The air pressure in the room visibly warped. His obsidian eyes were flashing a blinding, predatory gold, radiating a killing aura so dense the air shimmered. "You dare," Elias hissed. His voice wasn't a shout, it was a seismic tremor that shook the glass panes of the penthouse. He saw Cole. He saw me trembling against the wall, and then he saw Cole holding the 2 bundles. For exactly 1 second, I witnessed the total catastrophic collapse of Dr. Elias Stone. The invincible, terrifying Alpha went deathly pale, his broad shoulders freezing in sheer, unadulterated terror at the sight of his children in the hands of a known assassin. The murderous rage morphed into a panic so profound, it made my own chest ache in sympathy. He took a desperate step forward, his massive hands trembling. Give them to me." "Back off," Stone Cold barked, holding the bundles higher, backing toward the emergency fire escape. One wrong move, and I dropped them. Elias froze. His razor-sharp surgeon's eyes locked onto the bundles. He was calculating the trajectory, the risk, the anatomy of the fall. And that was when he saw it. Protruding from the top of the left cashmere blanket, right where a fragile infant's head should be, was a thick, green, curly stem. I watched Elias's gaze travel from the green vine to the perfectly spherical, rigid shape of the blanket, and finally across the room to me. Standing against the wall, with tears still streaming down my face, I gave Elias Stone the most subtle, frantic, wide-eyed wink in the history of the world. I saw the exact millisecond Elias's brilliant brain processed the absolute absurdity of the situation. The pure terror in his golden eyes short-circuited. His jaw clenched so hard I heard a faint pop. His broad chest heaved as he fought the sudden violent urge to burst into hysterical laughter. A thick vein throbbed dangerously at his temple as he actively choked down a cough that sounded suspiciously like a snort. But Elias was a consummate professional. If I was committing to the bit, so was he. He straightened his posture, doubling down on the apocalyptic alpha aura, though the corners of his mouth were twitching violently. "If you drop my heirs." Elias roared, his voice shaking not with fear, but with the Herculean effort of holding back a laugh. I will surgically remove every single bone in your body without anesthesia. I'm leaving. I'm taking them to the Hayes estate. Cole yelled, terrified by the sheer volume and graphic nature of Elias's threat. He clumsily kicked open the fire exit, struggling to balance the 14 pounds of fruit. Don't follow me. My babies. No, I wailed loudly, covering my face with my hands to hide my grin. Cole practically threw himself down the metal stairs, sprinting into the pouring Manhattan rain, clutching the 2 watermelons to his chest as if his life depended on it. The heavy fire door slammed shut. Silence descended upon the penthouse suite. Elias stood frozen in the center of the room. He slowly turned his head to look at me. I lowered my hands from my face. For 10 excruciating seconds, neither of us moved. Then Elias walked over to the walk-in closet. He pulled open the heavy oak door. Sitting safely in the padded laundry basket surrounded by soft towels, Leo and Ilara were sound asleep, sucking their thumbs, blissfully unaware of the hostage crisis that had just occurred. Elias stared at his sleeping children for a long moment. He placed a hand over his face, leaning heavily against the closet doorframe. His broad shoulders began to shake. A low, deep, breathless sound escaped him. The tyrant of St. Jude Medical Center was laughing so hard he was silently crying. Watermelons. Julian Elias wheezed, turning back to me, his immaculate hair a mess, his eyes crinkling in pure disbelief. You gave a trained lethal assassin 2 organic watermelons. The adrenaline finally crashed and a hysterical giggle bubbled up from my own throat. They were seedless, I offered weakly, wiping a real tear from my cheek. The hysterical laughter that had seized Elias Stone didn't fade gracefully. It abruptly shattered, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence. Elias slowly pushed himself off the doorframe of the walk-in closet. The golden amusement in his eyes dissolved, replaced by a dark, fathomless sorrow as he looked at the 2 green watermelons abandoned on the pristine rug, and then back up at me. The absurdity of the situation evaporated. In its place, the brutal reality of what I had just done settled over the room like a lead weight. Julian Elias whispered, his voice stripped of all its usual commanding resonance. He took a slow step toward me, his eyes mapping the exhaustion etched into my pale face. You bought produce to use as decoys against an armed assassin. I looked down at my bare feet, suddenly feeling incredibly small. I didn't have any other weapons, Elias. I had to protect Leo and Ilara. I thought if Cole came, and if you weren't here, or if you decided you didn't want to fight my family. Elias closed the distance between us in 2 long strides. He didn't touch me, but his towering presence was a shield blocking out the rest of the cold world. You truly believed I would let them take you. The heartbreak in his voice was devastating. You were so terrified of this world, so terrified of me, that you spent the last 3 days formulating a plan to swap my heirs with fruit. I swallowed a lump in my throat. I'm a Hayes by blood, Elias. I know what power does to people. I didn't think I was worth protecting. Elias's jaw clenched. I saw his large hands curl into tight fists at his sides, restraining an urge I couldn't quite comprehend. He was an alpha operating on pure protective instinct, yet he was forcing himself to stay back, terrified that any sudden movement would shatter the fragile trust we had just inadvertently built. The immediate aftermath of the watermelon incident brought a bizarre shift to the hospital's dynamic. By the very next morning, Nurse Sarah casually mentioned that the chief of surgery had issued an absolute hospital-wide ban on watermelons. It was framed as a sudden severe dietary hazard for patients, but I knew the truth. Dr. Elias Stone, the tyrant of Manhattan's medical elite, had developed genuine PTSD from seeing a green vine protruding from his child's cashmere swaddle. But beneath the dark humor of the situation, a painful tension began to stretch between us. Later that evening, Elias sat on the edge of my bed. In his hand was a small tube of antiseptic ointment. During the scuffle with Cole, the trench-coated fixer had managed to scratch my collarbone, a thin, angry red line marring my pale skin. "Sit still," Elias commanded softly. He leaned in his face, inches from mine. The scent of storm and sandalwood washed over me, potent and intoxicating. I held my breath as his large, calloused thumb gently rubbed the cool ointment over the scratch. The contrast between his lethal reputation and the excruciating tenderness of his touch made my head spin. I looked up through my eyelashes, studying the sharp line of his jaw, the dark circles under his eyes from sleepless nights spent guarding the nursery. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He was so close. My omega instincts practically screamed at me to lean into his chest, to bury my face in his neck, and let him claim me. But the ghost of my past whispered a crueler narrative in my ear. He is doing this for the twins, my insecurities hissed. He is a good father. He's protecting the mother of his heirs. Don't confuse duty with desire, Julian. If you push for more, you might ruin the only safe haven you have. Elias paused. His thumb lingered on my collarbone for a second too long. His obsidian eyes flicked up, locking onto my violet ones. The air in the VIP suite crackled with unspoken words. I saw the golden ring in his irises flare, a sign of an alpha desperate to bridge the gap. He leaned in just a fraction of an inch, his gaze dropping to my lips. My breath hitched, but then Elias abruptly pulled back, clearing his throat and hastily capping the ointment. "That should heal in a few days," he said gruffly, standing up and putting a safe, agonizing distance between us. He was terrified of scaring me, I was terrified of being unwanted. We were two fools dancing around a fire, both too scared of getting burned to realize we were freezing to death. The fragile peace shattered exactly 48 hours later. I was walking down the private hallway toward Elias's adjoining office when I heard the raised voices. The door was slightly ajar. Elias was standing behind his mahogany desk, surrounded by a team of anxious-suited lawyers. "They can't be serious," Elias snarled, throwing a sleek black envelope onto the desk. "They are Dr. Stone," the lead attorney said, adjusting his glasses nervously. "The Hayes family has essentially declared corporate warfare. Your father, Arthur Hayes, has acquired the majority debt of 3 of St. Jude's primary pharmaceutical suppliers. If you do not hand over Julian and the children within 24 hours, they will cripple this hospital's supply chain. Furthermore, they are threatening to launch a massive media smear campaign accusing you of kidnapping a mentally unstable Omega." I froze in the doorway, my blood running cold. "Let them try," Elias roared, sweeping a stack of files off his desk. The papers scattered across the floor like dead leaves. "I will liquidate my own trust fund to buy out those suppliers. I will tie their legal team up in court for the next decade. Julian is not leaving this building. Elias, if you do this, the Stone family legacy." "Damn the legacy," Elias cut him off, his voice echoing with absolute terrifying finality. "My family is in that nursery. My mate is in that suite. I will burn Manhattan to the bedrock before I let Arthur Hayes touch a single hair on their heads." I stepped back into the shadows, pressing my hand over my mouth to stifle a sob. My mate. He had called me his mate. But as the warmth of that realization flooded my chest, a colder, darker truth settled over me. Elias was willing to destroy his entire life's work, his reputation, and his hospital just to protect me. I was a broken Omega hiding behind an Alpha's shield, letting him take the bullets meant for me. I walked back to my room, my legs trembling, but my mind was clearer than it had been in 9 months. I looked at the encrypted flash drive I had hidden in the lining of my duffel bag, the financial records I had stolen from my father's safe the night I ran away, evidence of offshore embezzlement, illegal genetic tampering, and bribery. I couldn't hide anymore. I wouldn't let Elias lose everything because of my cowardice. It was time for the discarded Baron Omega to show the Hayes family exactly what happens when you corner a mother. The polished steel doors of the private elevator slid open with a soft, expensive chime, revealing the sprawling, sterile expanse of the Hayes Corporation's executive penthouse. For my entire life, this room had been a slaughterhouse for my self-esteem. It was designed to intimidate, built of cold marble and reinforced glass hovering over Manhattan like a vulture. I stepped onto the plush carpet, my hands wrapped firmly around the leather handle of a luxury twin stroller. "I see you finally remembered your place, Julian." My father, Arthur Hayes, sat behind a massive mahogany desk, swirling a glass of amber scotch. He looked exactly as I remembered a ruthless, aging alpha who viewed his children only as assets on a balance sheet. Standing around the perimeter of the room were half a dozen of his board members, all alphas, all looking at me with the same condescending sneer they had reserved for the barren disappointment of the family. "I brought what you wanted, Arthur," I said, my voice eerily calm. I didn't call him father. I hadn't since the night I fled the Plaza Hotel. Arthur's eyes gleamed with greedy triumph as they locked onto the covered stroller. "Smart boy. You saved Stone from total financial ruin. Now bring the heirs here. I need to verify their genetic markers before I call off my blockade on St. Jude." I didn't move. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my tailored coat and pulled out a sleek black flash drive, tossing it onto the glass coffee table between us. It landed with a sharp clatter. "What is this?" Arthur barked, his brow furrowing. "Everything," I replied smoothly. 10 years of offshore embezzlement records, proof of illegal genetic tampering, the exact paper trail of the bribes you paid to the FDA. I spent 9 months hiding in cheap motels, Arthur. I had a lot of free time to dig through the files I stole from your safe the night I left. The room went dead silent. Arthur's face flushed a deep, dangerous purple. "You little bastard. You think a few encrypted files can bring me down? You are a weak, submissive Omega standing in a room full of alphas. I will take those children, and I will lock you in a psychiatric ward for the rest of your pathetic life." He stood up, radiating a crushing, suffocating alpha aura designed to force me to my knees. Before I met Elias, that pressure would have broken me. I would have cowered. But I wasn't that broken boy anymore. Arthur marched toward the stroller, violently ripping back the $1,000 St. Jude cashmere blankets to seize his prize. He froze. The board members leaned in, their expressions morphing from arrogance to sheer, unadulterated confusion. Sitting in the padded seats were not 2 crying infants. There were 2 green watermelons. They were a week old now, slightly bruised from their encounter with Cole the assassin, and beginning to emit a distinctly sweet, putrid smell of rotting fruit in the sterile penthouse air. What the hell is this?" Arthur roared, his hands trembling as he stared at the fruit. "It's a metaphor." I smiled, a dark, genuinely unhinged smile. "You always treated me like an empty vessel, Arthur, so I brought you exactly what you deserve. Rot. I'll kill you." Arthur lunged, his alpha pheromones flaring in pure murderous rage. But I didn't step back. I closed my eyes, picturing Elias holding our babies in the dark, and for the first time in my life, I stopped suppressing my own nature. I shattered the mental dam I had built. My omega pheromones exploded outward, but they weren't the sweet submissive scent of a victim. They were weaponized. The sharp, overwhelming fragrance of night-blooming jasmine flooded the room, deeply intertwined with the terrifying metallic scent of ozone and Storm Elias's scent. It was the scent of an omega who had been thoroughly claimed, protected, and empowered by an apex predator. The Haze alphas physically recoiled, gasping for air as the sheer dominance of the mated scent choked the oxygen from the room. Arthur stumbled back, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with horror as he looked at me. Suddenly, the elevator chimed again. The heavy doors didn't just open, they were practically torn apart. Elias Stone stepped into the penthouse. He wasn't wearing his doctor's coat today. He wore a bespoke midnight black suit, looking less like a chief of surgery and more like a god of war descending upon a battlefield. Behind him, a dozen heavily armed security contractors flooded the room, neutralizing Arthur's guards in a matter of seconds. But Elias didn't look at the guards. He didn't look at the board members. He walked straight toward me, his obsidian eyes burning with a fierce, intoxicating pride. He stopped right beside me, wrapping a massive possessive arm around my waist, pulling me flush against his side. Arthur Elias set his voice a low, lethal vibration that shook the glass windows. "You are breathing my air." Arthur was pale, trembling before the overwhelming power of the Stone family patriarch. "Stone you would destroy your own hospital for him. He's a defective. Say another word about my mate, and I will cut your tongue out and feed it to the stray dogs in Central Park." Elias interrupted his tone, chillingly conversational. "That flash drive Julian gave you, copies have already been sent to the FBI, the SEC, and the New York Times. Your suppliers have been bought out by my trust. The Hayes Corporation is dead. And you are going to federal prison." Elias turned away from the ruined man, dismissing him entirely. In a room full of shattered enemies and rotting watermelons, Elias looked down at me, his sharp features softening into something painfully vulnerable. "I tore this city apart looking for you," Elias whispered loud enough for only me to hear his golden eyes searching mine. "For 9 months, I couldn't breathe properly without the scent of jasmine. I thought I had lost my mind in that elevator. You were never a vessel, Julian. You are the only thing that makes my heart beat." Tears pricked my eyes, but they were tears of absolute victory. The heavy, suffocating armor I had worn for my entire life finally fell away. I reached up, grabbing the lapels of his expensive suit, and pulled him down. Right there, in the center of the empire that had tried to destroy me, I kissed the tyrant of Manhattan. Elias groaned, his arm tightening around my waist, kissing me back with a desperate, consuming hunger that promised forever. When we finally broke apart, the Haze alphas were nothing but pathetic shadows cowering in the corners. "Come on," Elias murmured, gently grabbing the handle of the stroller carrying the watermelons. A faint, amused smirk played on his lips. "Let's go home, Julian. The twins are waiting, and this fruit is starting to offend my medical sensibilities." I lagged a bright, clear sound that echoed in the silent penthouse. I took his hand, our fingers intertwining perfectly, and we walked out of the darkness together. The Atlantic breeze carried the crisp, salty tang of the ocean, cutting through the heavy, sweet fragrance of summer roses blooming across the manicured lawns of our Hamptons estate. It was a beautiful, sun-drenched afternoon in late June, the kind of day that felt entirely disconnected from the cold, ruthless concrete grid of Manhattan. From my comfortable perch on the shaded veranda, I rested my chin in my hand, a soft, involuntary smile tugging at my lips as I watched the chaos unfolding on the grass below. Leo and Alara were officially 1 year old, and they had recently discovered the terrifying power of walking. Leo, possessing his father's stubborn streak and relentless energy, was currently trying to chase a golden butterfly, his chubby legs moving in a frantic, uncoordinated blur before he inevitably tumbled face first into a patch of soft clover. He didn't cry. Instead, he let out a loud, indignant babble, pushed himself right back up, and continued the pursuit. A few feet away, Alara sat completely still beneath the shade of an oak tree. She had my vibrant violet eyes, but the terrifyingly calculating way she stared at a crawling ladybug was pure Elias Stone. She was already analyzing the world, plotting her next move with the precision of a seasoned surgeon. I took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the sun sink into my skin. A year ago, I was a ghost. I was bleeding out on a sterile operating table at St. Jude Medical Center, suffocating under the weight of a decade's worth of trauma, convinced that my mere existence was a curse. I had spent 9 agonizing months running through the dark, grimy underbelly of New York, believing that an Omega like me, labeled defective, barren, and useless, had no right to claim happiness. I had viewed alphas as monsters, and I had viewed the world as a cage. But looking at my children now thriving and safe beneath the endless blue sky, the phantom pains of my past finally dissolved into nothingness. The downfall of the Hayes Empire had been swift and absolute following our confrontation in the penthouse. Arthur Hayes and his corrupt board members were currently adapting to life inside a federal penitentiary, their assets liquidated and their names scrubbed from the elite circles of New York high society. Just last month, Nurse Sarah had visited us here at the estate, bringing a basket of toys for the twins. She had laughed over tea, telling me how the hospital atmosphere had completely changed. St. Jude was no longer a playground for arrogant billionaires. Under Elias's leadership, it had become a sanctuary. My reflections were gently interrupted as a tall, imposing shadow fell over the veranda. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The air around me instantly filled with the profoundly comforting, deeply familiar scent of a gathering storm and rich sandalwood. It was a dominant alpha aura that could still make an entire boardroom of executives tremble, but the moment it brushed against my own jasmine pheromones, it softened into a warm, possessive caress. Elias walked into the sunlight. The brilliant, formidable chief of surgery, a man who routinely dictated the fates of New York's most powerful families, was currently wearing a crisp white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up a pair of relaxed shorts and a dark navy kitchen apron tied neatly around his waist. In his massive, elegant hands, he carried a heavy crystal platter. Resting on the glass were perfectly uniform triangular slices of bright crimson fruit. They finally fell asleep. Elias asked, his deep, velvety voice vibrating pleasantly against my back as he stepped up behind my chair. Not yet, I chuckled, leaning my head back against his chest. Leo is still trying to wage war against the local insect population. What is that you're holding, Dr. Stone? Elias looked down at the crystal platter, his sharp jaw tightening slightly as a faint, amused grimace crossed his handsome features. It is a highly regulated, thoroughly inspected seasonal snack, rich in hydration and essential vitamins. Elias utters, I teased, tilting my face up to look at him. Is that watermelon? It is a crimson gourd, Julian, he corrected with deadpan medical seriousness, though the golden ring around his obsidian pupils flared with unspoken affection. And I will have you know that I personally supervised the vendor who delivered it to the estate. I checked the structural integrity of the rind myself. There are absolutely no hidden messages, no contraband, and no tracking devices inside this produce. I burst out laughing, a bright, unbridled sound that echoed across the lawn. The watermelon incident had become a permanent, legendary running joke in our household. Despite his lingering tongue-in-cheek PTSD from the day I outsmarted a trained assassin with a grocery run, Elias now meticulously sliced the fruit for me every single weekend. The hospital-wide ban at St. Jude was still technically active. Elias claimed it was a matter of administrative principle, but here in our private sanctuary, it had become a bizarre, beautiful symbol of his unconditional indulgence. Elias set the platter down on the wicker table and slid into the chair beside me. He reached out his long, scarred fingers, intertwining perfectly with mine. I looked down at our joined hands. Resting against my pale skin was a heavy, polished platinum wedding band. It looked elegant and unpretentious to the untrained eye. But on the very inside of the band, hidden against my pulse point, was a microscopic custom-engraved image of a single slice of watermelon. Elias wore an identical ring. It was our private chaotic secret, a reminder that our love hadn't been born out of a perfect textbook romance, but out of a desperate, unhinged willingness to do whatever it took to survive and protect each other. What are you thinking about? Elias murmured, his thumb gently tracing the back of my hand. Just how much everything has changed, I said softly, turning my gaze back to the twins who were now both curiously investigating a patch of dandelions. I spent so long believing that I needed someone's permission to exist. I thought being an Omega meant I was destined to be a victim of someone else's script. But standing beside you, I finally realized that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to build your own fortress, even if you have to build it out of pieces of a broken past. Elias pulled my hand up to his lips, pressing a warm, lingering kiss against my knuckles. His gaze was intense, unwavering, and entirely consumed by me. You never needed a script, Julian, he whispered, his voice thick with a fierce, protective devotion. And you never needed permission. You broke through the gates of my world and rewrote my entire life with nothing but your own strength. You are the Funan of the Stone family, the mother of my children, and the absolute master of my heart. The world doesn't dictate to us anymore. We dictate to the world. A comfortable, profound warmth bloomed deep within my chest, completely drowning out the final lingering echoes of my old insecurities. I leaned across the small space, dividing our chairs, closing the distance between us. Elias met me halfway, his massive hand coming up to cup the back of my neck, his thumb caressing my jawline with intoxicating tenderness. Our lips met in a slow, deep kiss that tasted faintly of sweet summer rain, iron-willed promises, and a lifetime of security. It wasn't a kiss born out of desperation or flight. It was an anchored, quiet declaration of a love that had successfully survived the storm. Behind us, a loud, synchronized babble erupted from the grass as Leo and Ilara realized their parents were no longer watching them. Elias broke the kiss, a low, rumbling chuckle vibrating in his throat as he rested his forehead against mine. The heirs are demanding a medical consultation, he murmured, his eyes crinkling with genuine happiness. Then we shouldn't keep our patients waiting, Dr. Stone. I smiled, wrapping my fingers tightly around his. We stood up together, stepping off the veranda and walking hand in hand into the bright, golden afternoon. The future ahead of us was bound to be loud, chaotic, and fiercely protected an unconventional family built on a foundation of absolute devotion and a few legendary pieces of fruit. But as I looked at the man walking beside me, I knew that no matter what shadows tried to cross our path, I would never have to run again. Because I had finally learned that true bravery is being exactly who you are and loving the one who makes you whole without ever asking the world for permission.